up this morning, waking up before it's getting 9. Kinda heavy on my shoulders.
Hey friends, so I was over at the Florida Audio Expo and it was an amazing experience. Florida overall was great, but the first room that I visited was the TAD Labs. Now if you don't know TAD Labs, TAD is a company that is basically a luxury branch of Pioneer. They used to only sell to the pro audio market, but not that long ago, they decided to sell to the consumer market as well. Now, I had the very pleasure of talking to Shinji-san, the president of TAD Labs, and I was able to hear their new, first released at the Florida Audio Expo, the Compact Evolution CE1TX stand mount speakers. Now, these speakers, just like the TAD ME1 speakers that I had before and reviewed on my channel, are a true three-way speaker with the CST, or Coherent Source Transducer driver, which is a dual concentric design, which controls the directivity of the concentrically mounted mid-range and tweeter and delivers ultra-wide range reproduction from 250 Hz up to 100 kHz. The tweeter is a beryllium diaphragm tweeter, and the port design, again, is very interesting with TAD products. The bidirectional aerodynamic slot, or ADS for short, is a port design which allows the air to escape on both sides, allowing the bass to basically be evenly distributed in the room. On this speaker, the mid-range features a newly developed magnesium diaphragm and a newly designed woofer diaphragm that is essentially the same woofer as the TAD ME1s, but a second generation to that woofer that I reviewed. And of course, this is a step up from the TAD ME1 speakers that I reviewed, and so it has an elegant wood enclosure that is a nice finishing touch to a higher end speaker like this. But also, something I didn't realize before is that TAD has their own gear as well, like CD players, amplifiers, and so on, that is very nicely crafted. So I'm definitely going to be looking out for those gear as well in the future for myself. But also the overall listening experience, the demo session I had with the new TAD speakers were quite exceptional. The imaging was very pinpoint, everything that I experienced with my TAD ME1 speakers, and if you haven't seen that review, I'll link in the description below for you to check out, is exactly what I experienced, but with a wider soundstage, deeper soundstage, and more delicateness and staging just perfectly in the middle to the side. Everything was very pinpoint and neutral sounding with great bass texture and overall a phenomenal sound experience for sure. My main takeaway from listening to the TAD speakers was that it is a speaker that is very precise without being bright or brittle or harsh, which was very important for me because I like the overall musicality of things, and TAD certainly did that for me while preserving that accuracy. Next room is something that you have never seen before, and neither have I. It's the classic audio field coil powered system, and this is a one hell of a system. It's a horn-loaded speaker, as you can see, and it has a bullet tweeter much like the old vintage JBL speakers, the prestige ones. And also you can see that the front has a 15-inch woofer with 2 ports in the front, and not only that, there is a 15 down-firing woofer at the bottom of this thing. And they had these drivers nicely displayed on the side for you to see the construction of these drivers, and there were some excellent drivers. Now, when I said that you have never seen something like this before, I meant it. Do you see these on the floor? These are not tube amplifiers, but they are part of this field coil system. Yes, the actual power amplifiers are these atmosphere monoblock amplifiers on the floor that you see here. And overall, this was probably the most dynamic, expressive sounding system I've heard in the entire show, and most involving and emotionally engaging. And I've never heard of this brand, but first time hearing it, I am just in love with this brand called Classic Audio Loudspeakers. And by far, I would say this is my choice for the best sounding room at the Florida Audio Expo. So that's it. I guess if that's what you were looking for in this video, this is it. Now you can leave. But actually don't. I have a lot more coming. Next up was Acora Acoustics room when they were releasing their flagship speakers in this gorgeous blue granite material. They told me exactly what it was, but I forgot. Goddamn reviewers and their memories, am I right? I should have written it down. but it was a very special material, and their flagship speaker was a testament of that. It is really gorgeous, and Acora Acoustics is a Canadian company that usually makes stuff in granite. And they had a flagship speaker, but I guess this is the new flagship. And I have to say, this is right up my alley. It is snappy, it's just on the edge of brightness control for me, and it is just amazing. With the VTL monoblocks and the VTL phono stage and preamplifier, overall the sound was wide, deep, and also very authoritative while preserving that snap and realism. Overall, I think this was a very promising testament of Acora Acoustics' efforts in the past few years, and I definitely urge you to have a demo of their flagship speakers when you get a chance. Now the next brand was Aretai. Now Aretai is a brand that I've never heard of before. It's relatively a new brand, and they had this interesting waveguide. Now when I talked to the engineer, he told me that the waveguide itself doesn't have any sonic benefits, like in terms of the fact that it's open, but of course it controls directivity and all that a waveguide does. The unique look of the speaker definitely is engaging, and definitely from very far away you can tell that it's an Aretai speaker. This speaker interestingly also has a woofer on the back of the speaker, which allows for a deeper frequency in the bass region, and I definitely heard that in this room. I was very impressed by the fact that the small monitor was able to produce quite deep bass and was authoritative. I wasn't a fan of the sound of the room on the first day of the show, but towards the end of the show, I kept going back because the sound coming out of the room was keep drawing me into the room. It started to sound better and better and better. It could have been that they were tweaking the system, or it could have been that the system needed some warm-up time, or it could have been the type of music they're playing. Nevertheless, I plan to take a look at these speakers, very interesting looking speakers, very soon on my channel. And also, I took an interest in these cables called Viablue. These are German handcrafted cables and accessories that were quite affordable, and I think that seems to be their goal here, is to make handcrafted German pieces that are more affordable to the market. And the technology and the craftsmanship overall wasn't falling behind in terms of quality. So I definitely took an interest, and I will be trying out their cables in my system in the near future if time allows. Next up was MonAcoustic's room, showcasing their Platimon speakers. These are the new speakers and their first release at the Florida Audio Expo. Now I did an entire coverage of MonAcoustics and their sound room in the description below. I'll link it back in Korea. So check that video out if you want to know more, but I'll keep it short. These are Platimon speakers that they're showcasing. They're mid-tier between the Supermon Mini and the Supermon speakers, and they're virtual coaxial speakers, featuring an AMT tweeter in the middle. And in this showroom, I thought it sounded good, but I thought it sounded a lot better back in Korea in their listening room. Of course, as all shows are, it is about showcasing what it's capable of to a degree, and I think they did an excellent job in this room for that. Now, the Sanctus Audio power bar and the cables looked gorgeous in this room. I need to get one of those power bars, man. It looks gorgeous. Anyways, like I said, I'll keep this one short. My next visit was to the Black Ice Audio Room, or ex-Jolita. Now, I've had Jolita components before, and they were all excellent components. No exception here. Black Ice Audio stuff was excellent, and they looked gorgeous. I mean, they just looked absolutely gorgeous. In terms of looks, they're 10 out of 10. I've already inquired to them about reviewing their products because of just how they look. Overall, sound-wise, in this room, they had it with the Zoo Audio speakers. It wasn't the most ideal room in my opinion. It just sounded okay to me. And that is no offense to Black Ice Audio or Zoo Audio in this case, because considering the outrageously expensive stuff that I've been seeing at the show, this is relatively a sane system put together nicely for relatively affordable budget. So considering all that, it sounded pretty darn good, but I will reserve my opinions about Black Ice Audio components on how they sound until I review them on my channel in my own system, because they just look gorgeous. I dearly hope they sound gorgeous as well. But so far from my impressions from the show, I think it's very promising. Ooh, this next one was awesome. This was Volti audio speakers and also Border Patrol. This is something that I wanted to hear for a very long time. Border Patrol and their DAC, amplifier, and everything was just amazing. It has really good sound staging, really atmospheric, really room-filling sound. This system reminded me of the classic audio loudspeaker room that I gave the best sounding room at the show at the beginning of this video. It kind of reminded me of that room, but with less dynamics. It was velvety smooth, very, very liquid, and of course, for the fraction of the price of the classic audio loudspeakers, I thought this sounded amazing. I was just very impressed overall, just right up my alley in terms of the sound that I'm looking for. Especially this DAC here has gotten a lot of good reviews and a lot of good attention, and it's something that I want to try in my system in the future for sure. Overall, if you're looking for a good set of tube DACs or amplifiers, then Border Patrol is something that you should definitely take a look at. Also, if you're looking for a horn speaker experience, then Volti speakers are definitely a go-to in my opinion. Definitely have a look at them. Now, next stop for me was the Orchid Audio Room, or Orchid Audio, however you want to say it. Now, they were showcasing their streamers, their GaNFET stereo amplifiers, as well as their monoblocks. Now, talking about their monoblocks, they're this tiny. They're literally sitting on top of the speakers. It's really, really tiny. However, these are GaNFET designs, which is a new Class D design that promises, again, non-Class D-like sound. And ironically, in this room, from what I heard, it didn't sound Class D to me at all. It sounded like a good Class AB design. And despite me knowing that this is a GaNFET design from their website that I read before, I had to ask the designer if this was in fact a Class D design. It was that good. It had really good dynamics, really good neutral and smooth sound to it, good depth and sound staging. Overall, nothing stood out to me or draw attention to itself in a negative way. Of course, it didn't have the sound staging or the atmospheric tube sound that I heard at the Volti Audio and the Border Patrol room that I just came from. But overall, coming from a room that was all tube design to a Class D design is a big, jump. And despite that, I didn't feel like I heard a congested sound or a soundstage that was lacking. I thought everything was fluid, liquid, and overall flew really well in this room with the speakers they were running. And I have to say, I really do love the small form factor. So for those of you that are limited in, for whatever reason, limited in the size of gear that you can get, then definitely have a look at this compact design, which, in my opinion, from what I heard at the show, really doesn't compromise much in terms of the audio quality aspect. Next up was the Endow Audio Room. Now, this company is an interesting company making omnidirectional speakers. Well, correction, semi-omnidirectional, and that the mid-range is done by this array of tweeters that's omnidirectional on the back. And then there's a tweeter inside this conical horn design that is making a directional high-frequency propagation or directionality. And then, of course, the bass is there to take care of the bass. They have a bookshelf model and a floor standard model. As you see here, I was listening to the floor standing model, and the bass is quite impressive. Now, one thing I knew about this speaker is that if you sit in the very dead center where the speakers are facing directly at you, you get a pretty balanced sound. But once you deviate away from that, you start to lose a little bit of that high frequency because the high frequency is very directional coming from that horn-loaded tweeter. So very interesting design. You get this atmospheric, very interesting sound cues because mid-range is omnidirectional. It seems like the sound is very much deep and wide. It's a very unique sound that is not really conventional because you can hear all the mid-range details and stuff that's going on behind the speakers, and it's very well layered. Very interesting design, and I highly recommend having a listen. It might not be for everyone, but it was certainly an interesting listen for sure. Next room was fascinating. It was featuring the Tobian speaker system. This is their two-way horn speaker that has not been released yet. It's set to be made in Switzerland, all handmade design. These speakers had 12-inch woofers and a 4-inch titanium compression driver. And I was told that they are 99 dB in sensitivity, which means they're very sensitive to drive, which allows for it to be driven with a tube amplifier, with a relatively low power output. Impressively, the frequency response is from 20 Hz all the way to 22 kHz, making this technically a full range system without the use of subwoofers. It had a very gorgeous finish, and even though it was a conical horn type of design, I didn't find the sound to be quite directive. It was filling the room just fine with wide and deep and atmospheric sound that was quite hard to pass by. I really wanted to sit in this room and listen for longer and longer and longer, but of course I had other rooms to hit. It was being powered by the Lampizator and Westminister Labs equipment, and these are very well-known tube units, which we all know and love very well. And they were driving these speakers phenomenally with authority, crispness, sound staging, depth. The only thing that I would say is a little bit missing in the system was probably imaging. I didn't get a dead center imaging. That could have been the room. That could also be the TV in the middle of the speakers. But other than that, the system sounded liquid, holographic, and very, very nice, with a really nice chest-pounding bass. But also it was very linear sounding for a horn speaker. Usually when you hear a horn speaker, sometimes it's a little bit more elevated in the high frequencies or a little bit imbalanced in the frequency ranges. This seemed a little bit more linear, a little bit more controlled, with a little bit of fun in the mid-ranges, a little bit more mid-centric kind of speaker, which I really liked and digged about the speaker sound quality. Next up was the Borresen Loudspeakers, and these were very interesting to me. They had a ribbon tweeter and they seemed to be very directive. They had the speakers very far apart from each other, which was also very interesting. And I think I know why they did that though. The sound was very focused, imaging was spectacular, it had body and warmth to the sound while being very full sounding, chest pounding bass, the authority and the gut and the warmth in the mid-range was just on point. This system by far was my second choice in terms of the best sound of the show. There was a TV on one side, almost right next to one of the speakers on the right channel, and despite this, the speakers sounded phenomenal. It didn't sound shouty or splashy at all. The ribbon tweeters really control the directivity of these speakers so that the listener between the speakers had a wide sweet spot to really get that imaging and focus. And even though the room didn't seem like a very favorable room, the speakers did a really good job of controlling that directivity to make the room sound fabulous. And the room, from my understanding, didn't have any room acoustic treatment. So with that in mind, this speaker by far is the best demonstration I've seen at a show with no room acoustic treatment, and that is something to be said about these speakers. So next up, just really quickly, was Just Audio, and these guys apparently sell and also fix vintage gear. So if you are into vintage gear, make sure to have them a look. I mean, I thought I was looking at a DJ bar or something. This was crazy, light shows going on in here. These were acrylic Pioneer speakers that was sold as a demo at the time. Well, not for sale. It was a demo that they decided to bring here for fun. So yes, the speaker was not made by them. It was actually made by Pioneer with an acrylic cabinet to show the internals. I didn't know that existed. Well, here you go. You learn something every day. Anyways, check them out if you have questions about vintage audio. Very cool guys. Next up were these Piega loudspeakers, and these are loudspeakers that I've been eyeing for some time. Piega speakers have an aluminum body and they have ribbon tweeters. These were dynamic, I mean really dynamic. I'm not talking about just the bass, but the overall sound was dynamic. They were punchy, dynamic, contrasty, clean, very, very detailed. And yes, at times they can be a little bit fatiguing to listen to because they're definitely sit down and listening speakers. They're not for laid back, drink some beer, wine kind of speaker. These are sit down, critical listening, and these definitely do it. It is dynamic, and I'm talking about like piston, like pistol kind of dynamic. Really, really piston-like feeling in your chest, in your body, and every time you put on some, guitar strings, you feel the zing. Now, if you're someone that doesn't like brightness or zing whatsoever, then this speaker may be fatiguing for you. And it was fatiguing for me after some time, but definitely a very, very impressive kind of sound. And definitely a contender and a worth a look at if you are looking for a more detailed, dynamic, clean type of sound in a speaker. And maybe some of that dynamics have to be credited to the new BAT solid state amplifier. I heard that this was their first solid state amplifier to be on the market, and it's the VK655SC power amplifier. It's a true dual mono design with heaps amount of power and capacitors as you can see here. It is incredibly a beast of an amplifier with zero feedback and purely symmetrical design. Next, I met Andrew Jones, and he did a presentation in the room about his new Sourcepoint 10 loudspeakers. Now, these are very interesting designs, and I'm sure many of you have seen it already. This is a dual concentric design because Andrew Jones is a fan of dual concentric designs, and so am I. This is a very interesting design in the fact that it's a paper cone material with a soft dome tweeter in the middle, which is conventionally a little bit different from dual concentric designs that is usually not a paper design. Also, it was interesting to see him talk about the baffle design and the way it was shaped to minimize baffle resonances or diffraction, while trying to keep the baffle looking pretty. The beauty about the speaker design like this is that it's a dual concentric design, which allows it to be phase coherent as a dual concentric design should be. As well, pinpoint imaging down the middle is no problem, as well to the sides. The soundstage was large and deep, which I found to be excellent. The overall tonal characteristic was a little bit on the neutral side with a little bit of zing on the top, which I quite frankly didn't mind at all. The bass region was quite full, and I definitely look forward to perhaps reviewing this in the future. It was powered by the Rose Hi-Fi all-in-one player, and this amplifier, streamer, and everything, and it's just gorgeous, looks awesome, sounded pretty good with the Sourcepoint 10 speakers, so huge props to this room. GESHELLI Labs was up next at the show, and I saw their beautiful wooden cases that they make now for their units. If there's a reward for the best looking units at the show, they would win it. I mean, it is just gorgeous. I know the lighting is a little bit deceiving here. They had some interesting lights going on in this room to showcase the wooden grooves, but I think you guys can kind of get the idea from the shots I have here. Gorgeous looking units. Absolutely love it. They're a family owned business, and their daughters were there to help out with the family owned business. Big shout out to them, and definitely worth a look if you're looking for a rather affordable budget DAC or integrated and so on. Next, I heard the Diptyque, I hope I'm pronouncing that right to some degree, with Cyrus gear, and this sounded pretty transparent, a little bit on the hotter side than other planar magnetic speakers like Magnepan that I'm familiar with in the past, but overall it was very transparent, crisp, and fast. Overall, I really like the sound of these speakers, and the bass was quite impressive, very punchy, very dynamic for a planar magnetic speaker. I would have to go back to it, but I would say it was more dynamic than I remember Magnepan speakers being. Now, Magnepan is only being referenced here because that's the planar magnetic, reference that I have because I'm familiar with those speakers. By no means am I, slashing Magnepan. So you'll see that this gear called SoulNote is driving both the acoustic energy and the per-listen room. But before we talk about the per-listen speakers or the acoustic energy, those speakers I'm familiar with. SoulNote is a brand that I'm not familiar with and I have never seen before. According to the rep at the show, these were ex-Marantz engineers that left Marantz and decided to make this brand. And these gear made these speakers sound fabulous. Now, I'm familiar with per-listen and acoustic energy. I've heard them before. I won't talk about it too much because I do plan to make an entire video on these speakers soon. However, with the SoulNote, I requested for review because it's such an interesting type of gear. Ex-Marantz engineers, the real OGs, making this gear. And they look amazing in my opinion, minimalistic, with a little bit of touch to the front plate to add a little bit of texture. And the sound I was getting out of these units, despite the fact that they're not tube devices, which I'm pretty sure they're not, but correct me if I'm wrong. Like I said, I'm not familiar with this brand. It mesmerized me because the sound I was getting was so tube-like. It was very musical to my ears, as if I was hearing to a tube amplifier or a tube DAC. It was very holographic, well pinpoint, lively, but not bright, airy. I absolutely love the sound I was getting out of these components, and knowing the speakers helped because it made me allow to pinpoint what was causing this kind of sound characteristic to come through, and I believe that SoulNote was it. We'll find soon enough because I'm gonna get one in here to review for myself in my room. Ex-Marantz engineers, made in Japan, is a high-end audio brand in Japan, brought to North America, so very promising. I look forward to it. Next up is Q-Acoustics Concept 300, their flagship bookshelf speaker. I actually have this right now in for review, so I won't go into it too much. But you can't even get it because they're out of stock. That's how good they are. They're fantastic speakers. I mean, bar none, for the price you pay for these speakers, I genuinely think that it's hard to get anything better. Oh, am I spoiling it too much? Okay, I'm gonna stop it right there. Q-Acoustic room sounded pretty good. It didn't sound as good as in my room, but this is a hotel room, and in my opinion, it sounded phenomenal for the price of all the things at the show. Considering all that, this room sounded fantastic. fantastic. And I heard a lot of compliments, people going in and out of this room saying that it was just really nice. And they all said the same thing, which was interesting. And it's the thing that I find in my Q-acoustics speaker review as well, is the contrastiness. So think about that a little bit. The contrastiness on the speaker is really nice and it's non-offensive. That's the biggest comment I got. Non-offensive. The high frequency is there, smooth, but not offensive, with good bass. Okay, I'm gonna stop it right there before I spoil it too much. Next, I visited the Acora room. Now, I could be pronouncing that totally wrong. Never trust a YouTuber on how to pronounce things, especially me. But these speakers are Italian speakers and they looked very promising. I actually requested one for review because of the sound I was getting. Very mesmerizing, very liquid and warm mid-range. Reminded me a lot of the Sonos Faber sound, but with a little bit more warmth and gut and texture to the sound. And the biggest thing I got from this room was texture. It was an extremely textured, nuanced, and very a delicate sound that I was getting in this room, and it was very impressive. It wasn't the be and end all in terms of imaging or sound staging in this room specifically, but I saw potential for that as well. The sound overall was very, very textured, like I said, and that's the biggest takeaway I got from this room. Hopefully that transfers to my room as well, but we'll check that out very soon. Overall, the craftsmanship with the wood finish and overall look of the speaker is very much Italian craftsmanship like, and I definitely look forward to reviewing this sexy speakers. Next were these unusual looking speakers called the MC Audiotech. Now these speakers are said to be using polyester mid and tweeter that covers the whole range from 200Hz to 20,000Hz, leaving the bass region to be handled by the 12-inch driver in a transmission line configuration. These were being driven by the Modwright gear, the LS300 preamp, KW150 signature edition amp, and the sound was sublime. I mean, it was incredibly good. The music we were playing at the time didn't quite have the bass passages that I were looking for, so I couldn't confirm how deep this speaker goes, but overall it had good authoritative bass, it had impactful bass, but nothing crazy. The most impressive thing was the mid-range and high frequency for me. It was very coherent, and somehow, even being despite a very big speaker, it somehow disappeared, which was impressive. The imaging capability of the speaker was fascinating despite being a big box design. It didn't sound all that boxy to me either. So for all that, I thought the speaker was fascinating and definitely worth a look at for sure. Next, we're taking a look at the AGD production. I just came by this room, mesmerized by the sound coming actually from the outside of the room, typical show story. However, it's true. I was mesmerized by the sound that was coming from the outside of the room, so I went inside and found this company that I've never heard of, the AGD Productions. Now the question is this tube or not tube? Make your guess right now. Why would I even ask that, right? Well, it is not. I don't know. In fact, if you take a really close look at the tube here, you can look at that it's not tubes inside, it's actually a MOSFET design. They call it the GaN tube design, and it's a trademark by this company. This is a first time where I saw some type of MOSFET design stuck inside a tube, and it kind of blew my mind a little bit, because when I was hearing this, I mean, I thought I was hearing one of the best musical tube amplifiers I've ever heard. That's how good this sounded. I wouldn't even bring this up because it's a little bit embarrassing. I didn't realize until I left the room that these were not tube amplifiers. And that is just straight up crazy. The mid-range and the high frequency, the holographicness, the full holographic soundstage that you get out of a tube amplifier, these had that. With the Ocean Way audio speakers they had, which is a studio monitor from my understanding, it just sounded so pure, so gorgeous. In fact, in my opinion, it was the best mid-range, high-frequency holographicness I heard at the show. It didn't quite have the dynamics like the classic audio speakers that I gave the award to, but for sure the mid-range and high-frequency was fairly close, if not just on the verge of that. So -1 points for fooling my eyes, but +11 for fooling my ears. Lastly, linear tube audio was powering the Credo audio speakers from Switzerland. This room sounded pretty darn good. Linear Tube Audio was also showcasing the inside of the Z40 Plus integrated amplifier, which I took a shot of here. Gorgeous looking, and as always, Linear Tube Audio had that pure sound. However, interestingly enough, I didn't get much tube characteristic in this room. Maybe it was because I was just coming from the AGD Productions room. However, the overall sound was impressive, good imaging, good sound staging, good depth. There was nothing to really complain about this system. Overall, my impression of the Credo audio speakers matched up with the Linear Tube Audio was that it was a pretty balanced sound and nothing to really complain for, with impressive bass authority for a amplifier that's outputting pretty low power. If you are looking for a pure sounding low powered amplifier, definitely take a look at the Linear Tube Audio for your sensitive speakers. But also, Credo audio speakers sounded very impressive. Definitely have a look at them and demo them if it's possible for you nearby. So that's pretty much it for my Florida Audio Expo coverage. If I met you this year, thank you for stopping by and saying hello. If you haven't been able to go this year, I hope to see you next year at the show because it's a fabulous show. I definitely plan to come back to it. And obviously Florida was amazing. And while there were so many rooms that I couldn't visit every single room or check out everything in a meaningful way, I hope to do more so in next year's visit. And that's pretty much it. Thank you for watching, and hopefully you found my highlights of Florida Audio Expo 2023 meaningful, enjoyable, and I'll see you guys on the next one.